What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today we're going to be placing every live action Autobot slash protagonist into a tier list and giving my opinions and reasonings for each placement. So to get some ground rules out the way, we will only be doing the live action films, as in both animated films there are far too many characters to rank, and also since they are animated it allows for those films to spend a lot of time on each character and flesh them out, which then makes it unfair for me to compare them with the live action films where they couldn't spend as much time on each character due to budgetary reasons. As for the criteria, it's mainly based on how much presence the characters have in the films, if they do anything heroic or significant, and their personalities and their designs. I will be prioritising their heroic deeds and personality over the designs, as some guys have cool designs but they lacked in anything else, so maybe I'll come back and do a tier list where I just look at the designs alone for both the heroes and villains of the Transformers live action franchise, so just let me know if that's something you'd like to see down below. But yeah, now that that is all out of the way, let's get started with, of course, the leader of the Autobots himself, Optimus Prime. And do I really need to explain myself for this one? He very obviously goes in S tier for being, in my opinion, the greatest leader in all of fiction. This guy could make me believe I'd win World War III all on my own, and I actually probably would. I am combining his Rise of the Beast version with his Bayverse version, and will be doing the same for all characters that appeared in both continuities, as they're basically the same character beside minor differences, and it doesn't really affect their placement except for one character that I will get to later, and you can probably see in the list of characters here which one that is. But yeah, anyways, Optimus Prime gets the S tier without a shadow of a doubt. Next up is Bumblebee, who will also go in S tier just behind Optimus. And again, I need not say much about this, as he is a fan favourite character for a reason. He has the most screen time in all the films, and he has numerous moments to shine throughout the films. Bumblebee and Optimus are both staples of the franchise now, and in my opinion they both very much deserve it. But moving on, we've got Jazz next, and despite only having the one film to his name, I think he still goes in S tier for having one of the best designs in all the films, some of the best lines as well, where he is the voice of reason to Optimus, and he has some really cool fight scenes where he's taking on Decepticons nearly triple his size, and yet he's somehow putting up a really good fight in each of those. It is a shame he died in the first film, as I would have loved to see him interact with the other Autobots that came later. So next up we've got Ratchet, and he is going to be dropped into A tier. Whilst he was a great character that made it all the way to the fourth film, he also didn't have a lot of screen time and moments to shine, and he was almost never seen doing any medical work, and he didn't have too many amazing fight scenes, with the only one really being his brief fight with Blackout and Starscream in the first movie, but those scenes were about 2 or 3 seconds long, so I'm not counting that too much here. But next up we have an absolute beast, and my favourite Autobot in the whole series, and that is of course Ironhide. And yeah, he goes in S tier above Jazz. He has some great scenes, especially in that first movie against Brawl, and he has one of the coolest designs out of all the Autobots we've seen in these films. Alongside that, he has a great personality, and is an absolute pleasure to watch on screen. We will never forgive Sentinel Prime for taking him from us so soon, and without a fight, but it's safe to say I think we can understand why Sentinel did that, as Ironhide would have been an absolute menace for the Decepticons in that final battle. Moving on, we've got my second favourite Autobot, and that is Sideswipe, and he will also go in S tier. Sideswipe is an absolute badass. His design goes so hard for no reason, with the blades and the wheels for feet. He moves and transforms so smoothly, and he utilises all his weapons perfectly. I just wish we got to see more of him, and I wish they didn't just kill him off, or at least imply that he's been killed off screen. So now, with these next 3, we are unfortunately going to jump all the way from S tier to D tier, as I think the RC triplets were just a waste of potential. So yeah, they did have a semi-decent fight against Sideways, however that was barely a fight, as he didn't even transform, and even then they didn't seem to do much damage to him at all. Adding to that is their lack of screen time, and their deaths which weren't even made out to be that big of a deal, so I think D tier makes sense for these guys. Next up is the very controversial Skids and Mudflap, who will both go in C tier for having a lot of screen time and a decent fight scene against Devastator. However, they won't go any higher because they're racist stereotypes and the designs are not that appealing at all. Moving on, we've got Wheelie next, who will go in B tier for having a big role in Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon, and he has a great character as a former Decepticon turned Autobot who ends up turning the tide of the battle in Dark of the Moon when all the Autobots were captured. And if you join me in pretending the last night never happened, he had a very conclusive death after doing said heroic act, which rounds off his character really well. We've got another Decepticon turned Autobot up next with Jetfire, who I think deserves to be in S tier. He's a very entertaining character to watch on screen. He transforms into an amazing Blackbird jet, and he has one of the best entrances into battle as he comes in and kills Mixmaster with next to zero effort. He also gave his own life to save Optimus Prime, and so with that, he's pretty much a perfect character. So now we move into Dark of the Moon with our first character being Dino, and I'm actually going to put Dino in A tier, but at the top of A tier, which may upset some of you. However, I want to argue that even though he's an amazing character who was really cool and did cool things, he didn't really have many scenes to shine apart from the highway chase, and even then all he did was kill Ratchet, and then he spent the rest of it in vehicle mode, whilst at least Bumblebee and Sideswipe used their stealth modes. And yeah, I understand the whole deal with Ferrari meant that he couldn't use guns and all that, but if you're just looking at the film and not the behind the scenes stuff, it ends up in Dino not having much to do in those scenes. We've got Q next, who I think will go in B tier, just behind Wheelie, as he was a great character who played the scientist/inventor role really well, although he didn't actually do anything himself in the film. I think it would have been cool to even just see him in the background shooting Decepticons or even using some of his gadgets in battle. However, he doesn't unfortunately do any of that before he's killed, but I still think he deserves B tier as he played his role really well and he did have an interesting character about him. The Wreckers are up next, and my points for all three are pretty much the same except Topspin, who unfortunately didn't get any speaking lines in the film, and so he doesn't really have much of a personality. But apart from that, I think all three look amazing. They have really cool weaponized vehicle modes, and they have some alright scenes. However, most of them are either really short or in the background, so with that, I'm going to place Roadbuster and Leadfoot in B tier, whilst Topspin will go in C tier above these guys. If I can get them above them guys. There we go. I do wish we saw more of these guys actually fighting in the film, especially against DevCon, but besides that, they're still really cool characters. And our last character from Dark of the Moon is Brains, who I'm going to put in the lower end of B tier for having a decent role in Dark of the Moon and having the same heroic moment as Wheelie. However, he also plays a decent role in Age of Extinction, which helps to keep him in B tier and not C tier. So now we move on to Age of Extinction, and for this film, I want to say I'm one of the people that are not a fan of the more humanised look of these characters. I really don't like how there is next to no vehicle parts on them, and we barely even see them transform. Adding to that is the fact that whilst the Autobots do get more personality, their fight scenes are cut short quite significantly compared to the first three films, and a lot of the time they're either in the background or just not present altogether. But anyways, I do still like a lot of these characters. I just wish the vibe from the first three films carried through to these, as it would have been cool to see some of these Autobots get involved in some hand-to-hand combat, or at least team up to defeat a tough Decepticon. But with that out the way, our first character is Crosshairs, who I'm going to put in A tier, and I'm putting him here instead of S tier because we just don't see enough of him in action. He was completely absent from the final battle in The Last Night, and in Age of Extinction he's barely there as well. But other than that, he's got a reasonably decent design, and his personality is really interesting as a defiant Autobot who doesn't like being told what to do. Our next Age of Extinction Autobot is Drift, who also goes in A tier for pretty much the exact same reasons as Crosshairs. However, I'm going to put him ahead of Crosshairs for having a better design and being a triple changer. But again, he misses out on S tier because they for some reason didn't want to include him in as many battle scenes, and again he was completely absent from the last night's final battle. Next up is Hound, who is definitely going in S tier because he had the most presence in both films out of all the new Autobots, and he is very funny and entertaining to watch. I love that he carries hundreds of different weapons around with him, and he uses them all really well in both films, and he's definitely the best new Autobot introduced in Age of Extinction and The Last Night, and so he deserves the S tier. We've got Dinobots now, and these guys definitely should have been utilised more, as none of them were given much personality, and in The Last Night they were barely even part of the film, with Strafe and Scorn being non-existent altogether, which makes absolutely no sense to me. But yeah, anyways, the first one we're ranking is of course Grimlock, who will go in A tier, just because he has an amazing design, and he does get a few action scenes that were pretty decent, and he probably had the most personality out of all the Dinobots, which isn't saying much to be fair, but I still think A tier makes sense for him. And joining Grimlock in A tier is going to be Strafe, who also had some fairly decent action scenes in Age of Extinction, and he has a pretty cool design as well. These next two, however, are gonna have to be dropped in B tier, as they didn't have many scenes despite having some really cool designs, and they should have done a lot more with these guys, but since they do have the cool designs and they play somewhat of a role in Age of Extinction, they're going to go in B tier and not any lower. And now into The Last Night, where we didn't actually get a lot of new main Autobots, with a lot of these guys either being background characters or smaller characters that don't really get involved in the action too much. So anyways, we'll start off with Hot Rod, and for Hot Rod I'm going to put him in A tier, because he had a fairly large role in the film, and he has a great design despite not looking anything like his G1 counterpart. He does also have some heroic moments where he saves Squeaks and fights Megatron alongside Hound and Bumblebee, so I'd say he deserves A tier for those reasons. And speaking of Squeaks, I'm going to put him in C tier, because he was a pretty pointless character, and I didn't really feel anything from his and Isabella's relationship. His design is also pretty weak, and overall I'm just not a massive fan of this character, and I'd put him in D tier if it wasn't for him having a decent amount of screen time and having a heroic moment where he blows up that cannon, even though it didn't really do much anyways because Optimus turns up 5 seconds later. But yeah, anyways, next up is Canopy, who I'm going to place in D tier because he was only in the film so that he could die and give Isabella some kind of motivation, which it would have hit harder if we'd actually spent more time with this character, but since he was barely in the film, and like I say, he only served one purpose, and that was to die, and as well, his design is just a repaint of Longhaul's design with a different head, so he doesn't get any points for any of that in my opinion. And another pointless character next, which seems to be a recurring theme in The Last Night, is Day Trader, who is definitely going in D tier. I find this character annoying and stupid, I don't like his design, and he serves almost no purpose in the film except that he tells Cade that the talisman is rare, which ends up being redundant as it's such a minor point of that film anyways. And again, our next pointless character is Trench, who will go in D tier. However, I will give him points for staying behind with Hound to fend off the Decepticons, but we don't actually see him fight any Decepticons, so it's not really enough to get him any higher, and it doesn't really serve as that much of a heroic moment as none of the characters acknowledge his existence anyways. But moving on and going back to some actual characters, we have Cogman, who is going to be put in A tier. He's a very funny and charismatic character. He also has a lot of screen time and a fairly interesting design. He would have definitely gone in S tier if we actually saw him be a headmaster in the film and get involved in the fight, as it was teased through the toys that this would be the case. And I was hoping that the different vehicles he used in the film would all be different bodies that he could take on. So, for example, he would have had an Aston Martin robot mode and then a McLaren robot mode, and then finally he would have taken Nitro Zeus's body near the end of the film, which I think would have been amazing to see, and it would have been so interesting and unique to actually see something like this in live action, but unfortunately we didn't get that, and so Cogman only goes in A tier. And our final Bayverse Autobot slash protagonist is Dragonstorm, who I'm gonna put in C tier. I do love the design, and I think it's cool that we had a three-headed dragon on the Autobots team. However, he just didn't really do anything. Like, he blew up some ships and then transported Optimus into battle, but apart from that, it was as if he wasn't there, which is a shame because the film hyped him up quite a lot throughout, and I was expecting to at least see him fight Infernicus or even Nemesis Prime as one poster teased, but nevertheless, that is the last night for you. So that is the ranking for the Bayverse Autobots, which, as you can see, is definitely a mixed bag with some great Autobots and some completely useless and pointless ones. But anyways, we'll move now into the new timeline with the Bumblebee movie, and we will start off with all the Autobots from the Cybertron scene, which I'm gonna have to put in C tier. This is because despite having perfect designs, they really lack in anything else. And yeah, you might disagree with this placement, however, it would be unfair to rank them any higher compared to the other Autobots we've seen, as they had a lot more screen time and action scenes than these guys, and so until we see more of them, they're just going to have to go in C tier for now. Next up is Cliffjumper, who gets a separate ranking for having an extended role and scene in the film, and so even though it was only by a little bit, he gets his own placement compared to the Cybertronian Autobots, and that is also going to be in C tier, but higher than the other Autobots, as he has a bit more dialogue and has a somewhat heroic moment where he refuses to give up information to Shatter and Dropkick, and he ends up giving his life in the process. And that is it for the Bumblebee movie, as the only other Autobot is Bumblebee himself, who are combined with the Bayverse Bumblebee as, like I've said before, they're pretty much the same character, and I don't want to overcrowd the list with too many different versions of each character from each film. And with that, we will move into our final live-action film with Rise of the Beasts, and we will start with Mirage, who is going to go straight in S tier, and I'm going to put him there, because he is the only other Autobot, apart from Optimus and Bumblebee, to have such special treatment when it comes to screen time and development, and I'm extremely grateful for that, as it was about time we had another character take centre stage, and I think they nailed it with Mirage. He was funny, interesting, likeable, and unique with his ability to create clones of himself, and I loved every scene with this guy in it, and he may become my new favourite once we see a lot more of him in the future. Next on our ranking is Wheeljack, or as he seems to now go by, Pablo. And for this guy, I'm going to put him in B tier, because I'm one of the few that actually does like his design, and even though he wasn't in the film as much as the other Autobots, I still enjoyed his presence in the film, and I thought he had some cool scenes. So for those reasons, I think he gets a B, but I will admit, I'm not going to ignore the problems with this guy. I just don't find them to affect me as much as it will for others, so it doesn't affect the ranking either way. Next up is RC, and yeah, this is the character I was on about that actually it does get two separate versions, because this is a completely different character altogether. Like, the RC from the Bayverse could have been named anything and it wouldn't affect anything about that character, whereas this RC definitely stands on her own two legs, and it's just a way more respectable version of the character that was way more in line with her G1 self and her Transformers Prime self, which seems to be where they took most of the inspiration for this character's personality. So with all that in mind, she's going to go in A tier for me. Our next character is Stratosphere, and I've got to say, I was not expecting this guy to show up in Rise of the Beasts at all, but I'm so glad he was. I love seeing this guy on screen, and his transformations were excellent and really satisfying to watch. I do wish he got involved in that final battle, but I'm not overly upset about that because he does bring Bumblebee in and gives Bumblebee that moment. So with all that in mind, I'm going to put him in the lower half of B tier. Oh, that is the wrong character. Where did I just put Oh, there we go. Yeah, lower half of B tier. And now we move on to some Maximals. And we will start with Apelink, who got very little screen time due to dying pretty quickly against Scourge. However, I think he made a reasonable impact with that screen time, and his sacrifice definitely classes as a heroic moment. And despite having a very short fight, I still think it was pretty cool. So I'm going to put him in B tier next to Stratosphere for those reasons. And now we have Optimus Primal, who is going straight in S tier for being one of the best characters in that film and having some really cool scenes. I especially love the scene where he chases Airazor through the jungle and up to the ruins, and then he has to fight her and eventually kill her. Like, that whole sequence was just, like, for some reason, it was just, like, really cool to see on screen. And yes, I just love this character. I can't wait to see more of him in the future, and I do hope we see more of him in the future, because he's already started off strong. And in that same vein, we have Airazor, who is also going in S tier. By the way, these placements aren't like solidified, it's just some of these characters like I obviously prefer over the others, whereas the other ones could go anywhere in that tier really. But yeah, anyways, back to Airazor. Yeah, she didn't maximise in the film, but I still love her design in beast mode, and her role in the film was really significant, and her character was really likeable throughout. And I've got to say, it was really tough seeing her get infected and have to be put down like that. But it is so tough to watch because she's such a lovable character, and yeah, I think she deserves S tier because she is one of the better characters in that film altogether. And now, unfortunately for our last two characters in this entire ranking, they're gonna have to go in C tier, just because we didn't get nearly enough time with them, and they were basically reduced to background characters. Granted, at least Cheetor got some voice lines, whereas Rhinox got nothing. What saves them from going into D tier is the fact that they had some really cool action scenes in that final battle that were probably my favourite scenes in that entire film, despite being so short. So for that reason, they will get the C tier, but I really wish I could have put them higher, and hopefully in the future I will be able to do that. But anyways, after all that, we have finished our tier list, and this is what I believe every character should be ranked next to each other. And as you can see, it's overall pretty positives for our Autobots in live action films. I think it's unfortunate that we didn't really get a lot of time with each character, but I can understand that is simply due to the budget required to animate each character in a real life setting, and so the filmmakers have to make sacrifices when it comes to dedicated screen time for each character, so I can't complain too much about that aspect. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this tier list. Make sure you comment your own rankings down below, as I'd love to see how your list differs from mine. And make sure you like this video if you want to see more videos like this. I will be doing a tier list for all the Decepticons, so make sure you're subscribed in order to be notified when that video comes out. But apart from that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all later.